There is a scene in Hereditary where a headless corpse floats into a cabin. Something eldritch and beyond human understanding had a plan that involved a headless corpse and a ceremony in a cabin. And this plan had been running longer than any character in that film had been alive. This implication is a perfect example of Eldritch horror, the total indifference of something much grander than human existence and consciousness. So, in today's video, we will revisit the best depictions of Eldritch horror in media. Hereditary is directed by Ari Aster and was released in 2018. The film opens with a funeral. The Grahams family's grandmother Ellen has died, and her daughter Annie delivers the eulogy. Annie is an artist who builds miniature houses, and the first scene of the film starts inside of one of them, which symbolically already hints at something controlling the family behind the scene, but more on that later. Ellen's youngest grandchild is Charlie. She is 13 years old, a quiet and strange girl. At the funeral, she sits drawing instead of listening and makes a specific clucking noise, which is a noise you would be very familiar with if you have watched the movie. After the funeral, Charlie tells her mother that Ellen always wished she had been a boy, which is a detail you should take notice in. Charlie also wonders out loud who will take care of her now that Ellen is gone. Annie is obviously startled by this, since she is the mother of Charlie, but the film continues nonetheless. Annie slowly starts to find evidence that her mother was involved in something she doesn't yet understand. It is like the grandmother is haunting the family, and there are several shots throughout the film where the grandmother's ghost can be seen. Strange things also starts to happen in real life to the family. A strange light seems to take over Charlie, and her behavior starts to change. A bird flies into Charlie's classroom window, and Charlie goes outside and cuts off its head. Watching Charlie is a strange woman who seems to be stalking her, or at least keeping an eye on her from afar. The film has a turning point when Peter, the oldest son of the family, takes Charlie to a party and ignores her to smoke some of that ganja with his friends. Left unsupervised, Charlie eats a chocolate cake with nuts in it, which she's allergic to, and she goes into an epileptic shock. Peter freaks out, and in his distress he carries her to the car and drives as fast as possible to get her some help. Unfortunately, due to her symptoms, Charlie can't get any air, and she sticks her head out of the window, but Peter swerves to avoid something in the road, and her head hits a light pole, decapitating her right there and then. Peter, who's in complete shock, drives home in a daze, and when he arrives, he leaves Charlie's dead body in the car to be discovered by Annie the next morning. What follows is a grief film, a very good and very painful one. Annie revisits a support group which she joined following her mother's death, and she meets a woman named Joan who teaches her how to conduct a form of ritual, which apparently can call back the spirit of a lost family member. Annie summons Charlie, or at least thinks she does, but nonetheless, something comes through, and it is now present in the Grahams family's house, and from that point on, the film begins to show you what actually has been going on this entire time. Annie discovers her mother's secret. Ellen was part of a cult devoted to conjuring the demon Paimon into a male host, which is why Ellen wished Charlie had been a boy. Paimon is one of the kings of hell, and he requires a specific vessel. Charlie was a form of placeholder, but this would be a temporary solution, since Paimon needed a male host to exist fully, and therefore Peter is revealed to be the final target. The cult in which Ellen was a part of had arranged this ritual across decades. Everything that had led up to this moment was basically logistics for getting Paimon into Peter's body. Charlie's death, Joan's friendship with Annie, the ritual. All of it was basically part of a plan that was bigger than any of the characters in the film could have imagined. The film ends with Annie decapitating herself after temporarily getting possessed by Paimon. Peter, in his distress, jumps from a window and hits the ground below, and the light that suggests Paimon enters his body, hinting at the final stage of the ritual being complete. He follows his mother's floating headless corpse into the treehouse in the garden where the cult is assembled. Charlie's decapitated head sits atop a statue of Paimon. Joan crowns Peter, and the ritual is complete. The last shot is a miniature of the scene, a dollhouse version of everything that just happened, which again hints to the first scene in the film, in which Annie is constructing a miniature house. And that's the eldritch horror of Hereditary. Not the imagery, though the imagery is genuinely upsetting. There are countless scenes in this film that will send shivers down your spine. But it is the way the film spends so long making you feel the weight of this family's pain, and then reveals that all this pain was just a small piece in a much larger puzzle constructed by the cult. The grief and experience the Grahams family went through wasn't accidental. It was all part of an eldritch demon's plan, which just goes to show the core element of eldritch horror, the total irrelevance of us mere humans to something indifferent to us. Annihilation is one of the classics in terms of eldritch horror. It has a wonderful plot, and the main thread in the movie is so cleverly thought out, so let's get into it. The film opens with a meteor hitting a lighthouse on the coast of Florida, and from the impact point, an expanding alien force field begins to grow outward. In the film, it is called the Shimmer. The Shimmer has been expanding for 3 years by the time the film begins, and it is revealed that in a few months it will reach populated areas. Many expeditions have gone in and almost none have come back. The one exception is Kane, a soldier who reappears at home after nearly a year missing. He is devoid of any emotion and he remembers nothing. After a while, his organ starts failing, and it is evident that something is very wrong with him. Kane's wife, Lena, is a biologist, and she joins the next expedition to find out what happened to him. Joining her on the next expedition is Dr. Ventress, a psychologist who leads the expedition, Anaya Torreson, a paramedic, Shepard, who's a geologist, and Josie, who is a physicist. They go in and their GPS technology fails within hours of being in the Shimmer. They find an abandoned military base with a memory card showing footage from Kane's expedition. On the card, Kane cuts open a living colleague to show what's moving inside of him. Some kind of worms or tentacles are inside the poor soldier's body, which hints at the Shimmer's effect on the DNA of living species. They find the remains of the other soldiers, and they are all dead as if they had exploded from the inside, and their bodies has turned into overgrown colonies of flowers and plants, which is actually quite beautiful. That night, a mutated bear attacks Shepard and kills her. The team is stunned at first, but they keep venturing on. Anaya, the paramedic, is slowly starting to become more aggressive in her behavior, and it is like she is losing her grip on reality. The team finds an abandoned building and decides to camp there for the night. Anaya has now gone completely insane and accuses Lena of killing Shepard. But before anything can happen, the mutated bear makes a return. The bear lures Anaya away from the rest of the crew members by replicating Shepard's voice. The bear has basically mutated into being able to recite human voices, which is horrifying to say the least. The scene ends with Anaya getting brutally murdered by the bear, and fortunately the rest of the team are able to kill it before it can harm any others. The bear and the plant-like soldiers are just two examples of countless mutated encounters the crew has throughout the film. They also find mutated deers who seems to be moving completely the same, which also is a hint at the film's final plot. Likewise, a mutated crocodile with sharp teeth is also found, and weird human-shaped plants can also be found inside the Shimmer. The physicist, Josie, works out what the Shimmer is doing. It functions like a prism, refracting everything inside its boundaries. Light, radio waves, plant DNA, human DNA. Everything gets mixed with everything else. As the film progresses, the team slowly starts to separate from each other as things become increasingly more disturbed. Ventress pushes on to the lighthouse alone. Josie decides to walk into a garden of human-shaped plants and lets herself become one of them, hoping to avoid a worse end. While Lena seems to be the only one left with any sense. By the time Lena finds Ventress in the lighthouse, she's already gone. Her DNA has mutated and leatherish skin seems to grow over her eyes and her face. Likewise, she is mentioning a quote from a Beckett work. The quote she is mentioning is from the novel Mole, which is a book about two characters who turns out to be the same person, which refers to the final act of the film. A certain sphere, which I can only describe as the Shimmer's origin place. This sphere absorbs a drop of Lena's blood and makes a form of Lena from the DNA inside of her blood. The copy doesn't speak or seem to want anything in particular. It just mimics her every movement, like it's learning her, or maybe just doing what the Shimmer does to everything else, which is refracted back at itself. Lena shoots it and nothing happens. She even hits it with a tripod, but it refracts her movement and
Lena gets knocked the fuck out.
When she gains consciousness again, she tries to escape through the main door, but the thing stops mirroring her and starts pressing into her instead, holding its face against her until she passes out. After awakening again, Lena finally beats the thing after putting a grenade in its hand. Behind her the fire goes up and the Shimmer seems to disappear without a trace. The film ends with Lena being back at the research facility, where she's debriefing about the expedition. She sees Kane sitting across from her in some kind of medical isolation. She asks him if he's really Kane, and he says he doesn't think so. And then after a pause, he asks her if she's really Lena, and she doesn't answer. They embrace anyway, and the camera finds their eyes, and the irises are shifting color just like the Shimmer. The thing I find so horrifying about Annihilation is how fragile the Shimmer makes our natural laws appear. How easily the DNA of the living things inside it changes, and how totally uncaring the shimmer is to the consequences. It is in of itself guided by some natural laws that are dominant and uncaring to our understanding of the natural laws. Annihilation and the shimmer have quite a lot in common with another Eldritch horror story from the author H.P. Lovecraft. The story is called The Color Out of Space, which is what the next segment is gonna be about. Die Farbe is a German film released back in 2010, and it is adapted from Lovecraft's short story, The Color Out of Space, as mentioned before. It was made on almost no budget with amateur actors, and it is, depending on who you ask, possibly the most faithful Lovecraft adaptation ever put to screen. The film is shot almost entirely in black and white, which is actually quite genius considering the plot, but more on that later. The story follows an American named Jonathan Davis who travels to Germany looking for his father, a military doctor who went missing after being stationed there at the end of World War II. Jonathan ends up in a remote village in the middle of the German countryside, where a reservoir is being filled over land that used to be farmland, or the former place of the gardeners. He finds an old villager named Amin Pierske, who knew his father briefly after the war. Amin and Dr. Davis shares a beer in the pub, and Amin begins telling the story of how he knew Dr. Davis' dad, and how he was involved in something that can only be described as unexplainable Eldritch horror. Amin tells him the story of the Gardner family, who used to live on the land that is now being made into a reservoir. It all started with a meteorite that crashed near the Gardner's farm one day. Scientists came out to examine and found it had strange properties. It was glossy and brittle, and it didn't behave like any known material at the time. Chunks of it disintegrated within days and just wasted into nothing, essentially. When the scientists cracked it open, they found a small colored orb inside that vanished almost immediately upon discovering. And shortly after that, a lightning storm hit what was left of the meteorite and reduced it to basically nothing. For a while, things seemed fine. The gardeners carried on, but then small things started going wrong in a way that didn't quite add up to our understanding of natural laws. The snow melted faster on the gardener's land than anywhere else. The crops grew enormous. There were huge abundant fruit, but everything tasted rotten, like it was spoiled from the inside. Animals and insects also grew larger and was at first more fertile, but then they just started dying out of nowhere. Then the plants followed, and the water began turning bad. The gardeners also told stories about how the trees began to sway when there was no wind, hinting at something conscious controlling the land. And then the family started breaking down. The wife suffered the worst. She began having severe delusion and eventually isolated herself in her room, where she slowly would start melting or rotting away, almost like the color had torn her apart from the inside. She is discovered by Amin, who checks up on the family after Mr. Gardner didn't show up to their usual meeting. Likewise, the two Gardner sons also seems to be missing, and Amin finds only Mr. Gardner sitting in his chair in the living room, completely out of it and obviously massively affected by the color. Amin does manage to find the two sons, or at least what is left of them. They seem to be a mushy pile of flesh, rotting just like their mother. While all of this is happening, a purplish color is slowly spreading across the house, indicating that the color is behind all of this. This is where the black and white choice really pays off, and why it might be my favorite production decision in any Lovecraftian adaptation. The only color that ever appears on screen is the color itself. For characters living in a black and white world, any actual color at all would be totally incomprehensible. We cut to years after the incident where Amin is accompanied by Dr. Davis' dad and some other American soldiers during the war. Amin takes the soldiers down to the Gardner family's farm to show them what happened to the family and to find the color. The farm has been completely abandoned at that point, and the Gardner family is obviously gone. The soldiers checks the well, and Amin is hesitant to let them go near at first, but the soldiers don't care and they throw a rock into the well, which awakens the color and it shoots up from the well. The Americans panic, but Amin seems to be drawn to it. The color completely covers the sky until it flies away into space once again. We cut back to Jonathan Davis, who finds his dad's in the wood, but he is completely out of it, and it is revealed that he saw the color firsthand and wasn't able to save his own sanity. The thing about Die Farbe is that it is an Eldritch horror film that doesn't compromise. There are a dozen moments in this film where a lazier version of this movie would hit you with a jump scare, but instead it draws out the scenes, and that is so much worse. Die Farbe makes you watch a man water his crops from a well you already know is infected by something completely unnatural and indifferent to our biological world. The Eldritch horror in Die Farbe is knowing exactly what's happening and being powerless anyway. The lack of unanswered questions also adds to the Eldritch horror element of it. It makes us feel so powerless in our futile attempt to understand it. As mentioned before, the Farbe and Annihilation actually have so much in common. The shimmer refracts DNA, while the color seems to rot organic matter from the inside, or at least seems to be disturbing the biology in the area it is affecting. Both of them also land on Earth uninvited, and begins rewriting the natural order according to rules that have nothing to do with ours, and neither of them seems to notice or care about how it is affecting the world around them. The shimmer doesn't hate Lena, nor does the color hate the gardeners. They just operate the way gravity or radiation operates, which just goes to show the indifference to our existence. That is what makes both of these stories eldritch rather than just scary. The horror of them is that our entire understanding of how the universe works turns out to be wrong, and that existence isn't what it seemed to be. In The Mouth of Madness is probably the most explicitly Lovecraftian film ever made, alongside Die Farbe of course. John Trent is an assurance fraud investigator. He is confident and very good at his job. He's hired by Arcane Publishing to find a missing horror novelist named Sutter Kane, whose books apparently have been causing readers to have violent breakdowns, disorientation, memory loss, and even paranoia. Trent reads the books for research and starts having vivid nightmares of his own. He notices red lines on the book covers that, when aligned correctly, form a map of New Hampshire, pointing to a town called Hobbs End, a town that doesn't exist on any normal or modern map. Trent and a woman named Julia, who works for Arcane Publishing, drive there, and on the way a cyclist passes them 3 times, with his face changing each time. Suddenly the road markings also starts to vanish, and then the road itself disappears. The drive ends in them entering a strange bridge in darkness and coming out in daylight in Hobbs End. The people in Hobbs End are characters from Kane's novel, and the landmarks match descriptions from the books. Trent thinks it's staged and part of some larger insurance frauds, until it becomes impossible to think that. A man at a bar tells Trent to leave before the evil infects him too, as it has the town, then announces he is a character written to commit suicide, and he goes through with it. Trent eventually finds Kane finishing his final novel. Kane explains that the popularity of his stories will free an ancient race of beings that will reclaim the earth, and that Trent is a character in one of the stories, with no choice but to return the manuscript of Kane's final novel to Arcane Publishing, which, when printed and sold to the world, will begin the destruction of humanity. Trent eventually makes it back to New York and tries repeatedly to destroy the manuscript but can't. He returns to Arcane Publishing and learns that Lena never existed. He was sent alone, and that he delivered the manuscript months ago, and that the book has been on sale for weeks and a film adaptation is already in production. Trent has a mental breakdown and murders several people with an axe and gets sent into a mental asylum. He manages to escape the asylum and walks out into a world overrun with mutant creatures and mass psychotic violence. He finds a cinema showing a film called In the Mouth of Madness, and the film is showing everything we have been watching. He watches himself, and as it catches up to his current moment, his laughter becomes something harder to categorize. The eldritch horror of In the Mouth of Madness is the slow decline of Trent's sanity, but more than that, it is how completely unaware he is of what's happening to him. He's a pawn in a much larger game, and even though he feels like he's all there, the reveal when he comes back to Arcane Publishing shows just how wrong his perception of reality has been. In the Mouth of Madness is one of the strongest depictions of a situation that is so incomprehensible to a mere human psyche and understanding of reality. Trent's sanity has been gone for days, and he has had no clue, which is just so haunting to think of. Not being able to trust your own mind because you're part of some eldritch design, a book with enormous power quietly steering you the entire time. The SCP Foundation is a fictional organization that catalogs and contains anomalous objects and entities. It is a collaborative writing project, thousands of authors, no central canon, and entries written as clinical documentation. Most of it reads like internal reports from a government agency that deals with the impossible. There are containment procedures, incident logs, interview transcripts, and everything is written in a flat bureaucratic tone that makes the content more disturbing rather than less. The SCP we are going to cover in today's video is SCP-3125. SCP-3125 is the main thread of the Antimemetics Division storyline. SCP-3125 is classified as a massive Lovecraftian-shaped entity originating from outside our reality. To put that in plain language, it is a living idea. It exists in the space where human thoughts happen, the collective consciousness. SCP-3125 is described as being aggressive in its thoughts and ideas on a scale that is incomprehensible to human understanding. Like our spectrum of aggressive thought does not align with that of SCP-3125, which is just haunting to think of when you consider the extreme of human aggressiveness. The moment you form a complete mental picture of SCP-3125, the moment you truly comprehend what it is, it detects you and tries to kill you. Not your body necessarily, though that follows. It kills your mind. It reaches into the space where your thoughts are, pulls them out, and then it kills everyone who thinks like you, your colleagues, your family, anyone whose pattern of thought overlaps with yours enough that they might reconstruct the knowledge you had. The Foundation's Antimemetics Division, which is a special group in the SCP Foundation, which deals with memetic like these, basically entities which are ideas or concepts that once are acknowledged or understood becomes a threat to human civilization. This division has been fighting this thing for decades, and they keep losing because every time they figure out what they're up against, the act of figuring it out is what gets them killed, which is actually quite funny. The Antimemetics Division is led by Marlon Wheeler, who operates on drugs called amnestics, the opposite of the Foundation's usual amnestics. Instead of making you forget, amnestics makes you remember things that are antimemetically hidden. She takes them to perceive threats that would otherwise be invisible, and they are slowly destroying her body and her mind in the process. At one point, her division has been reduced from 4,000 staff to 40. Every other antimemetics research group in the world has already been wiped out by SCP-3125, and most of them were erased so completely that nobody remembers they existed at all. Wheeler discovers that SCP-3125 has already breached containment in ways nobody noticed. SCP-3125 has manifested itself through cults, through people with extra organs that nobody can perceive, through broken mathematics, through a streamer who uses his audience as a vector to spread its influence. The war against SCP-3125 is almost over, and most of humanity doesn't even know there was a war to begin with. There is much more to the story, and I would suggest checking it out if you have the time. But here is the thing that makes SCP-3125 stand out to me. It is the Eldritch horror of the lack of understanding we mere humans have of it, its intentions, its way of working, its motive, just a complete lack of information. Trying to understand SCP-3125 is like trying to explain the workings of a nuclear power plant to an ant. It makes no sense, and the balance of power or understanding is the same when we encounter SCP-3125, an entity that eats other ideas and replaces human consciousness with itself simply because that is its nature. In a way, SCP-3125 is also a form of the shimmer or the color out of space because of how it rots human consciousness, thoughts, and ideas, the same way the shimmer and the color out of space rots the biological environments.